At the National Planning Department in Colombia, we're in charge of implementing SDGs. Colombia was the country that proposed SDGs, was the country was highly engaged in setting up the goals and the targets of the SDGs, and it's the Ministry of Planning in Colombia who's in charge of implementing, right? When we began our strategy for implementation, the first thing we did was we did an analysis of all the targets and goals. What we found was that 135 targets depended on the national government and 34 targets depended on work we have to do with the international community. We realized that 24 of those targets were hard to measure, were statistics that we didn't have. However, through almost already 8 months of implementation and hard work, we have either achieved regulation, policy changes, or budgets for 86% of 169 targets proposed by the SDGs. The National Planning Department was responsible for implementing SDGs in Colombia. Colombia proposed SDGs, but also was the first country to implement them. No one gave us guidelines or a roadmap to implement, right? We learned by doing, right? So at the beginning of the stages, we worked highly with United Nations and especially the Statistics Committee to make sure that the metrics that the SDGs come up with are easy to measure, and we can do we can follow the progress of the country in this regard, right? So DNP has been engaged in high-level meetings in Davos, at OECD, at CEPAL, at the regional level, telling how we did things, the things we learned, the mistakes we made. And the Colombian case study is an example of how to do things. The Commission has been very discreet but highly effective, right? The Commission has helped to draft the strategy, implement the strategy, assign SDGs to specific ministries so that they are responsible for regulation, policy, or budget appropriation for each of the goals. Soon we'll go into a second stage or a second phase where we will be more engaged with the private sector, with civil society, but we needed to put the house in order first. We plan to have a great engagement with the private sector, with civil society, with some national governments. At this moment of the stage, we were needed to put the house in order first in the government before we engaged the international community, private sector, civil society. At an individual level, we've got great strides, especially at the subnational level. Santander is the first subnational entity to implement SDGs. And as a result of that, we're very excited about what's coming up next for other subnational entities. But we're planning out the strategy of how to engage private sector, civil society in a more substantial manner once we get the proper policy instruments in place.